Hello my friends, and welcome to part 2 of the Magic of the Golden Dawn. This video is going to be focused primarily on the Outer Order Initiatory system. Last video we talked a lot about the Neophyte curriculum, how that tends to tie into a lot of different spiritual practices, and how it's really creating a framework for your spiritual endeavors beyond that point. What I want to get into right now is the initiations themselves of the classical Golden Dawn. The Neophyte initiation is a very interesting one, in that it starts with hoodwinking, and you're brought into this ritual space. There's that whole classical, you see it in Wicca, you also see it in Freemasonry, of the blindfolded and bound, brought through a hallway of some type, into an opening into a closed chamber that represents a womb, and then there's the opening of the eyes and the introduction to knowledge material. And this is all about unveiling of the light. This is all about the choice to seek the light, the choice to become an initiate, the choice to become a mystic and a practitioner of the arts of magic. The choice to go from being a Cohen or an uninitiated one, a muggle to use the Harry Potter terminology, to an initiate. Okay? That's what the Neophyte initiation is all about. The subsequent 4 initiations are elemental initiations intended to tie you into the powers of the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. In the classic Golden Dawn, these grades are called the Zelator, Practicus, or what is it? Zelator, Theoricus, Practicus, and Philosophus grades. Alright, so the 4 grades of the classic Outer Order of the Golden Dawn constitute a preparatory school. Work on your personality, work on your sphere of sensation or your aura, work on your basic powers, and connecting to natural powers of earth, air, fire, and water. The 4 grades are also correlated to the bottom 4 spheres of the Tree of Life. Okay? So we have Malkuth, or the Earth, we have Yesod, the sphere of the Moon, we have Hod, the sphere of Mercury, and we have Netzach, the sphere of Venus. Now, the elemental grades, the Golden Dawn, their philosophical system of correspondence, let's just be frank, it's a fucking mess, alright? They tried to combine so many different systems of correspondence and correlation and force them all together into a singular system, which is not impossible to do. And it's actually not that difficult to do. The thing that complicated it is that they needed it to be a secret initiatory system, so all of the works of classical, ancient, and medieval magic that had been published up to that point in time obviously had to be wrong. So in classical alchemy, you have a hierarchy of the 4 elements: earth, water, air, fire. Okay? And it just follows the natural world, like most things in alchemy do. Earth is the densest element, tends to sit on the bottom. Water is a slightly lighter, less dense element, sits above earth. Air, or gaseous matter, sits above earth and water both. And then fire, or energy, is way out there and it moves through all of them. Okay? That's a very basic, very natural attribution to a hierarchy of the 4 elements. In the Golden Dawn, they say it's earth, air, water, fire. How often have you seen water sitting on top of the air? They came up with that because of attributions of the Kabbalistic 4 worlds, of the divine world, the archetypal, formative, and material worlds, and gender correlations. And they had reasons for making it that way, but their reasons were not dependent upon observations of the natural world. To my way of thinking, when we're talking about the 4 elements, we need to stick as close to nature as we can and not allow the philosophical intellect to dictate the entirety of your practice. Okay? You need to have the intellect reflect the power of nature and reflect the power of spirit, not the other way around. You can't try to force nature to conform to whatever idea you have. You have to get your idea to reflect the reality of nature. In any case, this elemental system, when you try to apply it to the Sephiroth, gets even worse. Okay? Earth is fine. Earth is at the bottom. But then we get to the sphere of the moon, which by the Golden Dawn system of elemental hierarchy should be attributed to air. Have any of you ever heard of the moon being attributed to air? The moon is about intuition, reflection, psychic ability, little bit of emotion in there too, instinctive emotion. What does all of that have to do with air? Nothing. And then, when we go up to the next Sephiroth, the next degree of this outer order that's supposed to be the water, well, here we have the sphere of Mercury, intellect. This is where we have the magic, you know. Mercury in the West is very classically attributed to air, intellect, knowledge, and yet somehow in the Golden Dawn system we have Mercury attributed to water grade. Okay, so we have a conflict that's set up. And then over here, Venus, we have attributed to fire, which you could say fire, passion, love, expansiveness. That one can fit, Venus and fire. Venus probably more typically attributed to water again. So what we get when we try to combine astrology, elemental alchemy, the tree of life, within the Golden Dawn conception of how these things relate to each other is a philosophical mess where your air grade is being conducted in the sphere of the moon, your water grade is being conducted in the sphere of Mercury, and your fire grade is being conducted in the sphere of Venus. And I've never seen anything to make me think that the benefits of doing it this way outweigh the consequences. Alright, so this video is looking at the Golden Dawn style of magic, but I want to move beyond the classicism here and this concept that the Golden Dawn as it was codified by Samuel Liddell McGregor Mathers in the 1880s and 90s is the only correct set of Golden Dawn magical attributions to use. There are plenty of traditional style orders out there that will give you a very thorough, many years long education in that very, very, very complex and difficult system of magic. But even among Golden Dawn adepts, there seem to be two very different opinions between those who say that the classical Golden Dawn systems, with its sometimes counterintuitive correspondences, is like a well-tuned machine. It's just too complicated to understand how it works until you know all of the parts. And then the other view is that if you can simplify and make it more effective, you certainly should, because the people that created this system were just humans. Anyway, me being Indigo speaker, I tend to follow the more modern approach that says if we can make it more logical, a closer reflection of the truth of nature itself, a more efficient way to accomplish our own goals for self-development, and a more efficient way to accomplish our goals for practical magic, the weight of tradition does not weigh very much on the scales compared to all of that. Okay? In any case, that's as far as I am going to discuss the Tree of Life with relation to the elemental initiations, because the more important thing here is to get in touch with the elements themselves. Right. So, one of the most ancient symbols of the 5 elements, 4 elements plus spirit, is the pentagram. And the pentagram, obviously we use it in the lesser banishing ritual. There's also a supreme invoking ritual of the pentagram, which is critical to any solitary approach to the elemental grades. Let me just sketch out where the elements typically are attributed on the pentagram. Spirit tends to be at the top. Bottom left leg tends to be earth. Bottom right leg, fire. Top right arm, water. Top left arm, air. To get where they came up with these attributions, you have to draw the pentagram over the zodiac and get it to line up a certain way so that the arms fall on the cardinal signs, the appropriate signs. But as far as why we stick with this as a practical tool, there is an elegance to it because we have air and fire, are 2 yang masculine elements, on a single arm. Then we have earth and water, our yin elements on a single arm. Okay, so we have, when we're creating, banishing, and invoking pentagrams, there's already kind of this cross-quarter balancing that's going on here, with spirit hovering high up above. Now, the classical system on how to derive invoking and banishing pentagrams from this is a little bit odd. It's a little bit odd. To invoke, you move toward that element. To banish, you move away from it. So, the invoking pentagram of Earth comes from the top down, and the banishing starts at the earth point and moves away. Same with fire. Banishing, invoking. Gets a little weird though with our water and air, and that the invoking water is also the same as the banishing air. Now we wonder why. Why don't we use these arms? Okay, because so far we've used the connection between spirit and earth and spirit and fire for our invoking and banishing fire and earth. Okay, then we use this other arm here for all of our invoking and banishing pentagrams of air and water. And that leaves these two legs entirely unused. Okay, that's for our spirit pentagrams. And we have an opening and a closing, active and passive. So we have 4 pentagrams of spirit. Our active pentagrams of spirit run on this yang line, this fire-air line. When you bring it up, that is your equilibrating or opening, and when you bring it down, that is your closing or banishing. Okay, and then our feminine divine, or our feminine spirit, runs on the earth water polarity. Equilibrating, closing. Okay? Probably seems like a lot of complexity. For a while, I just went ahead and simplified it. Did the 5 elements clockwise for invoking, counterclockwise for banishing. These days, I do stick with the more complex traditional attribution. And I honestly feel it is a lot more effective. But if it's just too complicated for you, go ahead and try it simplified. In the classical Golden Dawn initiations, you would enter into a lodge, and adepts and other practitioners would do an initiation ritual to introduce you to each element. As a solo practitioner, you don't have that, so you have to figure out how to introduce yourself to each element. And this is where the ritual that we call the Supreme Invoking Ritual of the Pentagram comes into play. Now, in the interest of practicality, I am not going to present the Supreme Invoking Ritual of the Pentagram in this video. What I am going to highly recommend is that you Google it, or buy a book that has it in it. There are, a couple of variations out there, but they're all basically the same material. Refer back to what we were talking about with the pentagram to get some understanding of that, but understand that the basics of the Supreme Invoking Ritual, you do the same Kabbalistic cross that you do with the Lesser Banishing Ritual, and then instead of just banishing elemental powers, doing a single pentagram in each direction with a single god name, and then angels, get rid of all that. You do 4 symbols in each direction with 4 divine names vibrated. 2 of the divine names are Hebrew, and 2 are Enochian. And that, in my personal opinion, is what makes the Supreme Invoking Ritual of the Pentagram so powerful. And when I say so powerful, I mean it really, really is. Even if you don't believe in it. In any case, look up the Supreme Invoking Ritual of the Pentagram, and don't just do it with all 4 elements to begin with. Do it where you do the invoking air pentagram in all 4 quarters. And then bring the ritual to an end, and just let that be that. Okay? Generally, you're going to want to end the same thing for earth, water, fire. I would tend to recommend you start with the Supreme Invoking Ritual of the Earth Pentagram, then the Supreme Invoking Ritual of the Water Pentagram, Supreme Invoking Ritual of the Air Pentagram, Supreme Invoking Ritual of the Fire Pentagram, on 4 consecutive weeks. You can either do it once a week, or I would recommend every day, if you have the time and discipline. But one way or another, you want a repeating cycle of bringing these elemental energies powerfully into your life. Okay? And you want to use the Supreme Invoking Ritual because it brings the Enochian entities, these angels, which are very strange, and we'll have to do another video going into the Enochian magic in much greater detail, but it's a very, very powerful style of magic that goes beyond whether or not you actually believe it works, and it just does. So you're going to want to have a little bit of caution as you get into this. One thing that happened to me when I was first practicing the Supreme Invoking Ritual, when I did it for fire, on my front porch there was an ashtray with some cigarette butts in it, but nobody was home, and I had been working up in the lab for hours, and it just burst into flames and damn near burned the fucking house down. Okay? So understand that when you're doing the Supreme Invoking Ritual, you are really going to invoke these powers into your life, and they're going to have various effects on your life. I just got done listening to a guy named, Nick Farrell, go over some of the outcomes of traditional Golden Dawn initiations and the challenges associated with them. And his way of looking at it was, and what he's seen repeated again and again in lodges, is that the Earth initiation tends to bring financial and health challenges. The Air initiation tends to give you a hard time keeping track of your practical personality. You get kind of, The Water initiation tends to create a lot of relationship difficulties. And the Fire initiation tends to bring out any kind of repressed anger or other issues with your ability to do what you need to do in life. His way of presenting them was that it would create traumas in your life because any imbalances which exist within you are going to be forcibly corrected through the potency of the initiations. They also like to do this psychic surgery thing where the initiators, during your initiation, get all up in your aura with their energy and start implanting symbols into it and tying different powers into your aura. And the outcomes of that can be a little bit chaotic, aiming toward an ultimate balance at the Adeptus level. I would certainly encourage people to take a more positive and proactive approach to the elemental initiations, to where as you are bringing these elemental forces into your life, look ahead. Do you have obvious difficulties with your work life lining up with your beliefs about life? If you have a job that you feel is bringing you into the service of evil by what you do, and you're invoking divine earth energy, you're going to have some trouble keeping that job because it doesn't fit in with your spiritual mission. So be proactive. The same thing can apply with the water and relationships and how that can make interpersonal and love relationships so difficult. As you're bringing these divine energies in, look at those relationships. See if you can see the problem before it happens. There is nothing wrong with being proactive. There's this sense I get culturally that a lot of people, when their various forms of initiations and awakenings just fuck their life all up, they're like, yeah, I'm a veteran. It was tough, man. It's just, most people can't even handle the real thing. I'm so tough. I went through it. It fucked me up and destroyed my life. No. Just plug. Okay? Try to integrate them harmoniously to begin with. All right? For a solo going through the elemental work, obviously you're going to want to practice the Supreme Invoking Ritual of the Pentagram a lot. You're also going to want to craft your magical tools. Okay? Now, my cup that I made years ago, I repurposed, sanded all the paint off it, and set some gems in it. So that I don't have with me, but these are fairly classical examples of Golden Dawn ritual tools. That's an air dagger, a pentacle. They still call it a pentacle despite having the hexagram on it, and a fire wand. Now again, if you Google it or get any basic book on the Golden Dawn style of magic, it'll give you the basic dimensions. This wand is a little on the big side, and they're a pain in the ass to make. And I strongly encourage you do make it and don't buy it, because that pain in the ass, searching out the materials, maybe having to buy tools, maybe having to do some handyman craftsmanship stuff that you might not be totally comfortable with. Your first attempt at making the tool might come out looking kind of fucked up. Or it might be beautiful. the process of going through the effort to create a physical embodiment of the elemental power that through your ritual work you're trying to draw in is important to grounding your magic in your real life. This is an area where it's not that shortcuts are bad because shortcuts are bad. It's that effort is good because it more fully involves not only your mind, emotions, and energy, but your time and physical activities. It brings it into this world. Now, on these tools, you're going to notice a couple of things. One, weird color schemes. Okay? We aim for flashing colors, which I did a terrible job on with this. But if you look at a color wheel, yellow and purple are opposites on the color wheel. And if you get the shades just right, it'll give you this kind of trippy flashing effect. They call it flashing colors. The classical Golden Dawn has a lot of study of the subtlety of colors and how to maximize optical effects to enhance the drama and psychological impact of the ritual. Don't have to do it perfect, but bear that in mind. Now, as far as the symbols that go on all of these, red and green on the symbols, yellow makes it look like fire, but red and green on the symbols. You're going to have a divine name associated with the element. You're going to have an archangel name associated with the element. You're going to have an angelic order associated with the element. You're going to have an intelligence and a spirit associated with the element, and then the Hebrew name of the element itself. And then you're going to want a magical motto or name that all get put onto each tool. The Consecration Rituals invoke that divine name, archangel, order of angels, intelligence, and spirit, all of them, to consecrate each tool. You don't have to do these all at once. At this point in your work, maybe don't consecrate them at all. Wait until you learn the Watchtower Ritual. But definitely start crafting the tools. Let them sit on your table while you practice your elemental invocations, just so they can start to saturate, and so that by the process of learning these names and drawing them onto your tools and having the tools present, again, you're just bringing the powers more forcibly into your material life. Of course, we can't overlook self-development as we are looking at the elemental grades. Some of Nick Farrell's comments that I mentioned earlier about the challenges that you face, well, those challenges do need to be faced, and you do need to equilibrate not just the elemental forces in their abstract nature pouring into this reality, but also the elemental forces which already exist within yourself. So as we're looking at earth, water, air, and fire, with earth, you're obviously going to need to look at things like your physical health, your physical lifestyle, your control over your environment. You're also going to be looking at how you make money. Do you make money? Where do you get your food, clothes, etc.? Are you ethically comfortable with what you need to do for these things? And do you feel like what you do for a living contributes to your ideal self, your optimized self? The work of the 4 elemental grades is to optimize your incarnate self to make it a fit vessel for radical spiritual power. So at Earth, we have to look at our physical health, diet, environment. We also have to look at where we get our money and power. Water grade, we have to look at our emotional relationships to people. We have to look at our love life, our friendships, our bosses and coworkers, our family members, total strangers, and how we feel about ourselves and self-esteem. And this is really the time to start delving into all these areas where the water isn't clean and start cleaning it up in yourself, in your approach to people and life. Learning to be loving, learning to connect with people, to overcome falsehoods and lies, to show yourself honestly. And it can create chaos with people who are already in your life, and finding emotional relationships, either getting rid of the toxic ones and replacing them with new ones, or improving dysfunctional emotional relationships so that your social, romantic, and family life are harmonious with the emerging adept within you. Because if you're living life in a way which does not allow you to be your divine self, then your divine self simply is not going to be. Air, that's when we're looking at intellect. This is where we're looking at our beliefs. This is where any sort of issues you might have of battling between materialism versus spirituality are going to need to get worked out. This is where ethical beliefs are going to have to get worked out. This is where a lot of study needs to happen. This is where you need to get a firm, rational understanding of the practice of magic to ground all of this out there spiritual stuff within a comprehensible, understandable framework. And this is something a lot of people have a great deal of difficulty with, because a lot of classical approaches to magic are self-contradictory or don't make sense in regards to material science. We look at older sources and the ways they try to explain things. Oh, God forbid you read something from the 1920s where they were trying to use atomic physics to prove magic. Like, you got to put some time into weeding out the crap, weeding out the bullshit, streamlining your intellectual perspective on things, and committing the important stuff to memory. You need to perfect the element of air within yourself as you draw more of it in to be under your control. Fire is all about passion and action, okay? This is where looking at your sexuality, very important. Are you comfortable with your own sexuality? Are you able to fully express your own sexuality in a meaningful way? This is where things like hobbies and passions, this is where anything from political passions, religious passions, ways of dealing with other people, ways of handling anger, ways of handling conflict, all of these things that have to do with activity and fire really need to get addressed and worked out on an in-person practical level. The work of ceremonial magic isn't simply about getting power so that your ego can have whatever it wants. That could be kind of cool, I suppose, but if you actually want to be able to control those powers, you need to be coming at it with a better innate setup than that. And so the elemental grades are in part about getting those external powers to you so you can begin controlling them, but it's also about perfecting yourself, or at least balancing yourself in such a way that those powers aren't going to result in neurotic, compulsive, fucked up behaviors and emotional breakdowns and your life falling apart, okay? So take your time with it. From my perspective, the reason for this tradition is to acquire the power, all right? The entire existence of the Golden Dawn tradition is to bring you divine power and teach you how to use it. If you can accomplish those goals, then you have accomplished the work. That being said, let's get into the Tree of Life here. Because there's an element of the Tree of Life that's not discussed very often, and if you look it up, you'll first dozen videos on it or so are just going to be some dumb shit. And that is the night side of the Tree of Life, the Qilipoth. I'm going to start by sketching out the bottom four spheres of the Tree of Life. The ones that we focus on in our order grade work, okay? With Tiferet, the sphere of the adept, being up here. Now, one tradition, and this is a very important one to look at, because there are a lot of different ways to draw the tree, a lot of different ways to set up the Tree of Life, and it's not that one's correct and the others are incorrect, it's that each different way of looking at the tree is pointing to a different element of what this universe is all about. So, the dark tree, the Qilipothic tree, is an inversion of the normal Tree of Life, okay? I'm drawing this terribly because I'm trying to draw upside down. Some people say that it would be, alright, so Malkuth is the bottom sphere. They would say that would be the Kether, or the crown, of the next tree going down. And when you're looking at your basic tree and then the next one above it, when you're looking to get into divine realms and apply the tree higher up, it makes sense that the crown of this tree is the base of the next tree. But when we're looking at the Qilipothic tree, or the demonic tree of life is another way to look at it, what we're looking at is an inverse reflection of the classical tree of life. Now, the word Qilipoth basically means shells, and kind of the mythology that goes with the Qilipoth is that in the act of creation, the Sephiroth, or the spheres of the tree of life, were formulated in a divine balance. But a completely balanced system is one which is immobile and not moving and unchanging. So in order for a reality to exist which is constantly engaged in change and dynamic processes, there has to be inherent imbalance. The Sephiroth are a perfect balance, but in order to bring that into a material world as changeable and dynamic as ours, there have to be imbalanced or broken elements, parts that do not come up with an equilibrated equation. And to each of these inverse spheres is attributed either a demon or an order of demons. Now, in presenting this information, the point here is not to get you to try to summon a demon. What I want you to look at this as is sort of a primitive system of psychology where each of the Qilipothic orders represents a tendency toward destruction, which is inherent to this universe and inherent to the human psyche. And part of your work in the outer order is to A, acknowledge, and B, master each of these elements, because they're in you whether you want them there or not. Now, in a way, they're essential survival functions. But to have them be unconscious means they're going to be operating without you having any control over it. In order for you to have control over the Qilipoth or over the unbalanced powers, you have to acknowledge them, and then you have to master them so that as they do play out in your life, which they will whether you master them or not, as they do play out, you are using your own conscious will to bring them into harmony, to minimize their destructive abilities, and to, in a way, make the demons divine. I'm going to cheat here because it's been a long time since I've really focused on the Qilipoth. I can't even remember all of their names. Alright, so for Malka, the Earth Sphere, which the Malka Qilipoth is the same as the Malka Sephiroth. So your physical body is the union of this divine and demonic realm, and that's where we have Lilith, the Queen of the Night and the Queen of the Demons. Then in Yesod we have Gamaliel, the obscene ones, and then we have Samael, the liar or the poison of God. Then we have the Garab Serek, the ravens of death, the Tagiriran, the disputers, the Golohab, the burners, the Agshekelo, the breakers in pieces, the Sateriel, the concealers, the Gogiel, the hinderers, and at the Kether, the crown, the furthest inverse point, farthest away from balance, we have the grand archdemon Thaumiel, the two contending forces. Now, Thaumiel is the one I'm going to focus on for the course of this discussion. I recommend you Google a chart of all of the Qilipoth and spend time meditating on each one so that you can find your own intuitive connection to the understanding of what these words mean. Listening to me described is cool. I love the sound of my own voice because I am an arrogant bastard. But really, you have to make it your own. Gnosis is not something you inherit from somebody else. Gnosis is something that happens when you absorb all of the elements that you're getting from all of these different sources, transmute them and integrate them into your own being. So, study the Qilipoth on your own. But let's talk about Thaumiel, the most extremely far removed and unbalanced element of this night side of the Tree of Life. Two contending forces. It's almost like a definition of uninitiated religion. Satan versus God. Let's see, in Islam it would be Allah versus... crap, I can't remember the name of their archdemon. But in any case, the belief in good versus evil, and even in our pragmatic lives, we are subject to the will of Thaumiel. We are subject to the influence of Thaumiel when we look at new social situations where we say, oh, that's the good guy, that's the bad guy. Good cop, bad cop. Nice mommy, bad daddy. Or nice daddy, bad mommy. All of these things. Am I a Democrat or a Republican or whatever? And it's a natural human tendency. The mind wants to process things into pairs of opposites to differentiate them against each other. This goes back to the concept that these demonic forces are not evil. They are survival forces that are very much applicable to this world. Natural functions of the brain. The point is to become aware of them, recognize their limitations, and bring the application of them into a balance with everything else in your life. So our tendency to divide things into two contending forces is an illusion. When we look at Buddhism or Taoism or yogic philosophy and we see all this teaching of all opposites are illusions, all things are truly one. The demonic force of Thaumiel is what takes the divine unity at the base of existence and breaks it into opposing pairs, opposing forces to create this tangible reality. Where it becomes demonic and where it gets the dark side is when that function within your own psyche runs unchecked. When there is no understanding, much less acting on, the underlying unity. When the differentiation into two contending forces becomes the dominant way by which you evaluate people and situations. Is it good or bad? One or the other. Maybe it's not good or bad. Maybe it just is. All right, let's look at the next one. The Gogiel, or the Hinderers. There. The Hinderers. Simple. Goes back to Thaumiel and the two contending forces. Competition is part of everything in nature. Animals compete over food. Plants compete over sunlight. Trees fight with each other and kill each other over sunlight. Dead serious. Two contending forces is part of this reality. And the Gogiel, or the Hinderers, that is the ability of one organism or soul or intelligence or aspect of nature through doing its natural thing to inhibit the natural thing of another natural being. Okay? Two trees planted close to each other, all fighting for the sun. One's hindering the other and getting hindered back because they're fighting over the sun. Okay? These are all expressions of the forces of nature. So, when we let these run unchecked, we find ourselves unconsciously, maybe without even being aware of it, fucking up the lives of people around us. Find other people fucking up our lives. And there's this bias toward thinking that everything is about you. Just human psychology, as part of our survival instinct, we're biased when we see things going on that inconvenience us and get in our way. We think it's about us. That other person is getting in our way because they're mad at us. But then when it's on the other side, you're just doing your thing. Oh, I accidentally got in your way. I accidentally hindered you. That wasn't personal at all. And yet when it comes at you, it feels very personal. Because you're still in this Thaumiel dictated frame of consciousness. Okay? To eliminate that bias of everything being about yourself. To recognize both when you were hindered, that it's not about you, and that when you hinder another person completely by accident, you can go ahead and decide to recognize them and try to not hinder them. It's about bringing a mastery to your own base elements, to your own instinctive powers, so that you may become a beacon of a greater harmony, so that you may bring the divine into your actions and life. So all of this work, as far as coming to understand the Qilipoth, as far as balancing your elemental nature, is all preparation for what we were talking about in the last video, of becoming an adept, of awakening your own soul, of permeating the veil of Parakeet permeating the veil which separates the material world from the higher spiritual realms, and attaining that level of mastery. And in keeping with that, I'm going to briefly show you another ritual. The Banishing Ritual of the Hexagram, in its classical form, is designed to eliminate the impact of astrology on your life. I'm not going to get into the elemental hexagrams and using those to banish the elemental forces. You know, vibrating the name Ararita into the east with banishing fire hexagram to make sure that the impact of the fiery signs and whatever planets are in the fiery signs doesn't impact you. It's great stuff for practical magic. It is a technique you really do need to take the time to get good at, because it'll make it so that even when astrology is set against you, you can just blast all that energy out of your sphere and cast the spell the way you intend to cast the spell. For practical magic, it's wonderful for that. But a part of the hexagram ritual, they call it the analysis of the keyword. And it replaces, in the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, you do this Kabbalistic cross, and then you do your circle ritual, and then the Kabbalistic cross again. In the hexagram ritual, you do the analysis of the keyword, followed by your circle ritual, and a repetition of the analysis of the keyword. Okay? Now, we went into the meaning of the Kabbalistic cross in a fair amount of depth as far as what that does to your energy and how it sets you up for greater magic. The analysis of the keyword is a totally different formula, at least equally as important. Now, something that the Golden Dawn did a lot of, they practiced religious syncretism. They took harmonious elements of different religions and different mythologies, melded them together in ritual acts. So the analysis of the keyword draws upon Judaic mythology, Christian mythology, and Egyptian mythology, as well as classical astrology, and it puts them all together very succinctly. And the purpose here is to prepare you to cross the veil of Paraket and to claim the power of Tiferet. And it operates on the Christ mythology and the Osiris mythology of death and resurrection. Death to the lower self, death to the ego self, death to all of the Qilipothic forces that may have dominated your life for a long time. And through this ritual, you are preparing yourself to diminish and subjugate your weaker human elements and leave the throne of the heart open for the power of Tiferet to sit rightly on its throne. Okay? Some of the symbolism should be pretty obvious to people. The one thing I'll spell out for you is that Yud, Nun, Resh, Yud, or INRI, was written, supposedly written on the cross above Jesus. It's Jesus Nazareth Rex Judaica, or Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And in Hebrew lettering, that would be Yud, Nun, Resh, Yud. Okay? And I'm just going to show you what the analysis of the keyword looks like. If you have more questions about the symbolism, okay. But if you listen to the words and contemplate, I think a lot of it will make itself very obvious to you. Yod, Nun, Resh, Yod, the sign of Osiris slain. El, the sign of Isis in mourning. V, the sign of Typhon and Apophis. X, the sign of Osiris arisen. L, V, X, Lux, the light of the cross. And go ahead and let the light radiate out when you're doing that. Ha ha ha. Virgo, Isis, mighty mother. Scorpio, Apophis, destroyer. Soul, Osiris slain and arisen. Isis, Apophis, Osiris, Eo. Let the divine light descend. Iao is a Gnostic term. It's a divine name of God, ultimate name of God, Iao. Isis, Apophis, Osiris, the three Egyptian deities we're talking about right now, Iao. So that's how that ties in together. And what we have is, all right, the sign of Osiris slain. We start with death. Then we get to Isis mourning. That's the feminine principle. It's also the Shekinah. It is the living, perceptive spirit of God, almost like the feminine side of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Ghost is an active spirituality. Shekinah is a receptive or perceptive spirituality. So as the lesser self dies and sacrifices itself, that divine feminine mourns for the loss of even that primitive thing. Then you have Typhon and Apophis, destroyer gods. In the Egyptian cycle, when Osiris dies, he has to pass through this bark through the underworld and be torn apart and reconstructed and all this crap. Okay? So we go from the sacrifice, the recognition of the universe, the recognition of the feminine universe, to the purification and the power of fire, leading to Osiris risen, the rebirth of the sun god, the resurrection of Christ, the attainment of Tiferet. And then we just recapitulate it in this Virgo, Isis, Mighty Mother. What we're doing here is we're radiating energy out into the universe and calling the conscious gods that represent this alchemical process of death, transmutation, and resurrection to pour their power on you. And then you're singing out that ultimate name, and when you say let the divine light descend, you're drawing a flood of light into your circle. And then you go through the Hexagram Ritual of banishing the astrological powers in all directions so that you're left with a purified, exalted, and neutralized ritual space before you get into your practical magic. I feel like I'm leaving way too much out. But, if you see me leaving something out, ask a question. I love those. Before I wrap this up, I want to talk a little bit about the completion of the elemental grades, okay? In the classic sense, you would become a neophyte, get your basic knowledge, your initiation into the light, then through the elemental grades, you're shown each of the elemental powers, introduced to the Enochian beings and the power that they bestow upon you, and shown the meaning of the Qilipoth, shown the meaning of the demonic forces within this world, and how to recognize and tame and subdue them, and how to ultimately sacrifice your little self to become the greater self. Now, after all of these things, well, that sacrifice a little self to become the greater self is technically not part of the elemental grades. Between the elemental grades and the adept grades, we have this veil of Paraket. And there's a grade, or a non-grade, attributed to the veil of Paraket. They call it the portal grade. In Thelema, they call it Dominus Liminis. And this is a place where, essentially, before attaining Tiferet, you stop at the portal to reevaluate and to bring all the pieces back together. This is where, instead of practicing the Supreme Invoking Ritual of Air and the Supreme Invoking Ritual of Fire, you do all four together. Okay? You've taken time to focus on each element individually. Now you do all four of them together. You've studied the Qilipoth. Now you practice the sacrifice ritual in preparation to become Adeptus. Anyway, I feel like I'm going to be disappointed with this video overall because there's so much information that's all worth learning, and I've only given you just that much of it. But It is all widely available. I highly encourage you to hunt down as much of it as you can. Come to me with any questions that you possibly have. And remember, above all, the goal here is not to get it right on intellectual knowledge. The point here is to awaken the power and wield it. And with that, my friends, I bid you hail and farewell.